Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is about training, but we're going to talk about the importance of hydration on performance. So this is going to have like nutrition-based information, but the reason why I wanted to put it under training was because the person was specifically asking for the training benefit rather than like a nutritional health benefit. So, kind of a little bit of a classification thing that probably doesn't really matter much, but that was my thinking behind it. I like to try to label the podcasts like under the category they're in, because like on certain podcast listening platforms, you can do searches. So I like, for example, you can do Brutal Iron Gym Nutrition, and then you find all of our nutrition podcasts. Or you can do Brutal Iron Gym Training and find all of the training ones. Then we have Mindset, and we have Trainer Education, which is for personal trainers. But also there's tons of just good business and general life lessons in the Trainer Education podcast. So I actually really love when I get feedback from somebody who says like, I'm not a trainer, but this really made sense to me and blah blah blah, and it makes me feel good. So I like providing a resource for personal trainers because I don't think there's enough like purely educational style resources for personal trainers. Just to give you a little bit of insight, when you do personal training certifications, they're, oh my god, they can be anywhere from like pieces of paper that mean nothing to stuff that requires like a 4-year degree plus a big long process, and it's hard for people to ever know what the difference is. So I went to one place before. That was a large kind of corporate gym, and they had their own certification process for their personal trainers. It was an open book 20-minute test, and then they called people certified personal trainers. Ugh, that was a joke. So sometimes personal trainers don't have access to great resources. So that's why I like having those podcasts. So for today, the question was, in a sense, about the effects of dehydration. Like, is being hydrated important for performance? And the person kind of knew that that was a yes, but they just kind of used that to kind of introduce the topic, really. And then they asked like how to kind of deal with it or how to battle against dehydration. Now I've actually gotten a couple of people asking this question, so I'm kind of talking about one particular person, but a couple people have chimed in, so that's what made me think this was probably a really good topic. So in general, when we think of hydration, most people think of the liquid that they consume, but there also is part of the equation of like what allows us to feel hydrated is the liquid that we hold on to. Okay, so we're going to get into some of the science of this. Is hydration is your water intake or fluid intake plus the amount of fluid you're able to actually hold inside of your body. So if I drink a gallon of water a day, but I pee out a gallon, I'm not very hydrated, am I? No, because I'm pretty much losing anything I'm putting in. So we're going to talk about that part of it that I don't think it gets discussed enough. And then we'll kind of go on to the basics too. So somewhere where I've seen a lot of the effects of water or liquid not being able to be stored well is in the world of CrossFit. So what allows us to store water in our body, and particularly in our muscles, so we feel fully hydrated, we're prevented against muscle tears, muscle damage. Our muscles can kind of perform their best for our training or our performance activity. Is part of the equation of that is glycogen, which is a fancy word for stored carbohydrates in your muscles. So it's kind of like each of our muscles has its own kind of fuel tank. So we can store fuel in the actual individual muscle cell. So sometimes we think of like putting food in and think of it being in our belly or our intestines or our gut, but it actually, like, where we like want it to eventually get to is in our muscle bellies and have energy readily available for the muscles to do their activity. So what that is when we have carbohydrates stored in our muscles. Okay, when we eat carbohydrates, and there's science and blah blah blah, but in general, when you eat carbohydrates, it gets broken down into glucose, which is a quick digesting, kind of quick use sugar. So we can think of it that way. our body will then take that glucose and it'll store that energy in the muscles. In order to store it in the muscles, in order to form glycogen, we have to have carbs. We have to have the sugar actually from our diet. Okay, so we also have to have sodium and we have to have water. So if I want my muscles to be fueled properly for my training or any type of performance, I have to have those three things. I have to have water intake. We know that that's important for hydration. But I also have to have the ability to store the water, which requires sodium and carbohydrates. So why I was bringing up CrossFit was CrossFit is a kind of a mix of like relative strength, some resistance training, but it's kind of like resistance training cardio. So we've talked about in podcast number 30, way back when, a podcast titled Muscle Cardio, How to Lose Fat Without Losing Muscle. CrossFit is very good at taking off fat and pretty much for the most part maintaining muscle if you can avoid getting injured and stuff. But what ends up happening sometimes is there was a big craze about paleo diet, like a low carb or no carb diet paired with CrossFit activity, which is a very glucose based, energy dependent style of activity. So if I'm going into the gym and I'm going to work up to a 1 rep max on squats and then leave, I don't really need to have a ton of energy in my muscles because it's more of a nervous system type activity and your overall volume of activity is really low compared to people who do CrossFit where they might work up to 1 rep max. They're going to go run a mile, do some kind of crazy shit with a sandbag, and then burpees till they puke. So they're going to do just an enormous amount of workload. So the amount of energy they have available in their muscles is going to be equal, like just insanely important for what they're trying to do. So if your training style is a lot of activity at kind of like a medium to light weight, then the amount of glycogen you have in your body is extremely important to you. That's how you're going to feel your best during the activity. So that way you don't get started into it and then feel like you smashed into a wall and you can't ever find your second wind. So it's going to be extremely important that you have carbohydrates and sodium along with the water. The water intake is great for hydration only if you can keep it. So you need the sodium and carbs in order to keep it, okay? So in CrossFit, when they would do low carb diets, that like really killed their ability to hold on to glycogen and create glycogen. And then they would often rely on massive amounts of caffeine to kind of make up for having really no energy. And then it became kind of a hardcore thing to be able to be miserable. So CrossFit became cool if you could be miserable and still make it through the workout. Well, that's kind of, like congratulations, and it's good to make people mentally tough. But damn, why feel miserable while you're working out? Why not feel good, hydrate your body, fuel your body so you can kick ass and feel good about how well you did, not feel good about how shitty you felt, but somehow still survived. That doesn't seem like it's the best way to approach exercise. That doesn't seem like it's the best way to approach anything, really. So what we want to do, and I'm picking a little bit on CrossFit, there's other people who do it, but they're a good example of it. So what we want to do is to make sure that we have enough carbohydrates in our diet. We want to make sure we have enough sodium in our diet. So that way all the water we intake can stay within us, or a good portion of it or enough of it, and we can feel hydrated. Okay, so another example of this is people who do aesthetic-based competitions. So bikini, figure, physique, men's physique, classic physique, bodybuilding, all those damn categories. So when they do their diets, they eventually have to kind of get low on carbs and fats in order to get, sub 10% body fat and get super lean. And what they always talk about all the time is when they go on these diets, they're like, man, I'm peeing like all day. And the reason why is because they're low in sodium and they're low in carbs, so the water they're intaking is going right through them. So you'll have somebody report like, they're like, man, I feel like I'm peeing like every hour. And then usually somebody like me, who's a diet coach, we're like, that's freaking great. Because that means that we can tell that they don't have carbohydrates like hanging around in their system or sodium unnecessarily hanging around their system. We can tell that there's not that excess, and we need there to be an in excess so that way they can lose the body fat. So if I were to put somebody on a contest prep diet and they didn't complain about having to pee all day, I'd be kind of worried. And this is towards the latter stages of the diet, so don't get all like huffy and puffy on me about being unhealthy. Getting on stage at sub 10% body fat isn't healthy in the first place. So those people look freaking amazing, but it's not an activity done for health. It's an activity done for aesthetics. Okay. So yes, you want to keep them as hydrated as possible, and yes, health, 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 health. But at the end of the day, they want to win their competition. So you keep them as healthy enough not to die, but make sure they can do well. That's just the same as we do in any other sport. Is you want to perform well, and hold on to your health as best as you can. But sometimes you skirt that line to be the best you can be. Okay, so so those are kind of two examples. We have CrossFit people who don't eat enough carbs usually, and they end up overdosing on caffeine to survive. Then we have people who do contest preps for aesthetic sports. Same thing, is they're going to pee a million times a day because they're not having any carbs, and then they're going to start to try to overdose on caffeine to survive. So the first thing we want to think of when it comes to hydration is our carbohydrate intake. We have to make sure we're actually eating enough carbohydrates so our body can actually hold on to the water we're drinking. And we have to make sure we're eating the carbohydrates at the right freaking time so that way we can have the water available when we need it in physical activity. But if you are worried about fat loss or leanness, then you need to make sure you're having not only the right amount of carbs, but even away from physical activity, you could probably switch over to fats, and that'll probably be better for staying leaner over the long run. So this podcast is mostly going to be about hydration. So I have to point you to other podcasts to take care of that carbohydrate thing, okay? So in order to figure out how many carbohydrates you should have and to figure out when you should have them, the first thing you need to look at is podcast 153, which is titled, How Many Calories Do I Need? Okay, so that's how you're going to figure out how much food you should eat per day. Then podcast 33 tells you how much of that food should be protein. Okay, so you have all the food you should have, how much of it should be protein. The remaining amount, okay, of the other food that isn't protein can be carbs or fats. And in podcast 249, we discuss when you should have the carbs and when you should have fats and how much of that and blah, blah, blah. So podcast 153 for calories, podcast 33 for protein. That'll tell you how many carbs and fats you can have. And then podcast 249 tells you when to have the carbs versus the fats and all that stuff. Okay? So that's how you're going to figure out the first importance of hydration is making sure you have enough carb intake. So listen to those, put all that together, and you can have an idea of how many carbs you should have and when you should have them. Now, the other thing, like when you kind of think of this together, is we have to have enough calories and enough protein and carbs before and during our exercise. So if we put all that together, we're going to be able to do well. So if we don't have some of those components, so if I don't have enough calories in me before I start an activity, so an example of this would be fasted cardio. If you've listened to any of my podcasts about cardio, you'll learn that I hate fasted cardio because it's not effective for fat loss in the most effective way, and you cause muscle loss in the same process, and you generally just feel like shit. So what the hell? Why would we do something that's inefficient, causes us to lose things we want to keep, our muscles, and you don't feel good? So it's just pretty stupid. So in podcast number 120, we talk about types of cardio and how much of each one of them you should do. Okay? And then I also have a recent podcast about meal timing around cardio activities, which is podcast 305. And if you put those together, you'll hear my explanations for why I don't like fasted cardio. I've done it for years. I even helped a guy do a contest once, a friend, and we did 4 hours of fasted cardio every morning for 4 weeks. Yep, you heard me. 4 hours of fasted cardio. So we did an hour, went to the restroom, did an hour, went to the restroom, did an hour, went to the restroom, did an hour, went to the restroom. Every single morning before I taught, when I used to teach at the university, we did 4 hours of fasted cardio, and then we did an hour and a half workout in the evenings to get that dude in shape. Now, at that time, that was touted as the best way to go about it. That was freaking ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. We did it, and we did what was necessary. The person looked freaking great for the competition, but It was absolutely not the most effective way to do it. We both lost muscle in the process. So when I tell you guys this stuff, it's not because I just read it in some article. I tried this shit in myself, and I try it with clients. And there is so many better ways to lose body fat and keep your muscle than doing fasted cardio. Absolutely insanely so many better ways. What's the best way? Podcast number 30, titled Muscle Cardio, How to Lose Fat Without Losing Muscle. Okay? Podcast 30 tells you the best way. So I have done fasted cardio. I've done my fair share of it. I've done it multiple times in multiple different diets. So I've done diets where I lost 50 pounds in 10 weeks or less. I've done that 3 times and it involved fasted cardio because at that time I was on the challenge of losing weight. So I might have lost some muscle in the process, but I won the competition of the challenge. But that was not the most effective way to get lean and stay lean and be healthy and feel good about it. Okay, so when I say I don't like fasted cardio, I'm not full of crap. I've tried it myself and I've tried it with clients, and it doesn't work as well as other forms of cardio. So, okay, enough of all that stuff. So we've covered carbohydrate intake. We know how much we need to have, and we know why we need to have it before activity. So we're actually fueled, we're actually hydrated. You can't be hydrated on having no carbohydrates. Okay, a no carbohydrate diet, you can't be hydrated. There's no way, because you have nothing that's going to hold the water in your body. So if you think about glycogen, like how we can hold water in our body, you have to put together, like we said, water, sodium, and carbs. The way I think of this is when you put together sodium and carbs, you kind of put them together and you create a bucket. And then when you drink water, that water can get caught and stay in the bucket. Okay, if I want to hold on to water in a pail, I have to have the pail. Or if I want to put water in a bucket, I have to have the bucket. So without sodium and carbs, you have no bucket. You just pour water in your body and it runs right through you. So you have to have sodium and you have to have carbs to create your bucket, to hold the water in your muscles. So we covered why carbs are important and we covered how to figure that out. So now let's look at sodium. Okay, sodium is important. Now, when you start talking about people eating sodium, everybody has a freaking heart attack about blood pressure, whenever it's absolutely ridiculously unlikely that that's an issue for you. Most people's blood pressure issues are stress related and or genetic. It does sometimes have to do with your diet, absolutely, that's true, but they've done studies, and the general consensus at this moment in the research and stuff is only about 50% of people are really impacted by sodium intake on their blood pressure, and to a lesser degree than stress and genetics. So, is sodium something you have to watch for in regards to blood pressure? Yes, but it's not like if you have one, speck of salt on your food, you're going to have a heart attack. So whoever the hell marketed that concept did a fantastic job, because everybody thinks that's true nowadays. Just like everybody thinks cardio is the fastest way to lose fat, which is absolutely stupid. So we're going to go through how to figure out if you're having enough sodium, and also how to control the fear over blood pressure. Okay? So how do you know if you're too low in sodium? One sign is you drink a lot of water, but you also pee a lot. So if you're peeing every hour, every 2 hours, I'd argue probably even every 3 hours, if you're peeing that much, you're probably not having enough food intake and carbohydrate-based intake. Okay, so that's going to help us know, like if I'm peeing every hour or two, it might not be sodium. If I'm having a no-carb diet, it doesn't matter how much sodium I put in my body, I have to have the carbs to go with it. So if you're drinking a lot but you're peeing a lot, you have to look at both. Am I having enough carbs, and am I having enough sodium? So if you know your carbohydrate intake is correct based on the podcast I told you to listen to, but you're still drinking a lot and you're still peeing a lot, then you definitely don't have enough sodium in your diet. Okay, so that's one sign. Another sign is you feel a major drop of energy as you start your activities. So you kind of get into it, and then within 10, 15, 20 minutes, you are profusely, absolutely soaked in sweat. And you feel like shit, and you hit the wall, and you just can't find a second wind. That's another sign that you're too low in sodium, assuming that you're adequate in carbohydrates, okay? So if you don't pay attention to your carbohydrate intake, you will never know whether it's carbohydrates or sodium. So you have to pay attention to carbohydrates, otherwise you're going to take a big fat guess that it's sodium, do all these sodium-based things, and none of them are going to help because it might have been carbs in the first place. So you can't be lazy and not figure out your carbs and then just blame everything else and try to take a bunch of supplements. So you have to actually figure this crap out, okay? If you want to get the best results. Another sign of being too low in sodium is you're drinking a lot, but you're still thirsty all the time. And that's another sign that the water is just kind of going right through you. Okay? So, how do we add sodium? So if I find out that those things are me and I'm having normal appropriate amounts of carbs, but I'm running into the same problem. I'm drinking a lot, peeing a lot, I'm thirsty, I'm kind of sweating a lot during my activities, I feel like I'm low in energy, I'm kind of hitting the wall, just don't feel good when I exercise, even though my calories seem appropriate and my carbohydrates seem appropriate. Well, that tells you that you're probably too low in sodium, and especially if you do high endurance, high volume based activities, because your sodium need is going to be ridiculously high, above normal levels, so you can't get away with a normal diet and have that be adequate. If you're doing extraordinary things, you have to have extraordinary support for those things. Okay, kind of makes sense. So, how do we add more? First of all, you add more through food, not supplements. Okay, so some people look at these Noon tablets or Nun tablets. I don't know how you pronounce them. I think it's Noon. But they're basically sodium-based tablets that people will try to drink, like add to their water while they exercise. And you might as well throw a penny down a whale because you're looking at the most freaking inefficient way to do it. So the most effective and most efficient and most healthy way is to make sure you're having enough sodium in your food. So they have 1,000,001 apps nowadays, like MyFitnessPal, for example, is one, where you can plug in the foods you eat per day, okay, the food items and the amounts, and it'll calculate sodium for you. So back when I used to do this, back in the day, because apparently I'm old now, we didn't have, there was no cell phones, didn't have internet in your cell phone, and when I was in college and trying to figure all this crap out, I wouldn't go to like the food. There actually probably wasn't even MyFitnessPal. I don't even know how people did it, but I had to do it through these stupid little books you had to carry around that were like a deck of cards, and you'd flip through these little tiny pages with this stupid little tiny writing and try to read across this little tiny lines that are made for like an ant to read, and you'd have to add up all that crap yourself throughout the day. There was no fancy apps, so I know I had it so hard. Ugh. But we used to use books and calculate that stuff out. So the general recommendation, I think nowadays is still 2,400 milligrams of sodium, so 2,400 milligrams. And what you want to do is really, that's an okay thing to know, but it's not really that helpful, because just because you're at 2,400 doesn't mean it's right for you. Everybody has individual needs. So if you're a female who does a lot of running and you only weigh 100 pounds, or you're like me, you're a male, you're 6 foot 280, 2,400 milligrams is going to be very different for each one of us. Okay, so what you want to do is kind of calculate that out throughout the day. So use like fitness apps or stuff like that. Put in some foods and amounts and see how much sodium you're having per day. What you'll probably find is it's ridiculously like fluctuating per day. So back when I used to, I still help people nowadays, but I remember I had one client back in the day had an eating disorder. So I do work with people nowadays who have eating disorders. And one of the things they run into all the time is an inconsistency of sodium makes them feel bloated and pudgy. So one day they'll eat a little bit more, like to try to be quote unquote healthy, but they accidentally will eat something high in sodium. And typically they tend to go for a lot of like sweet and salty type foods because it kind of has like an interesting taste to them. And usually if they're anorexic or bulimic, they're also dehydrated and they're also malnourished. So their body's going to try to promote them to eat things that have high sodium in them to try to replenish electrolytes. So they tend to have a natural tendency to lean towards things that have high sodium, food-wise. So if they don't know that and they don't pay attention to their sodium, one day their sodium can double compared to the previous day. Then later that night or the next morning, they feel pudgy. They don't like the way they fit in their clothes, so they freak out and they eat nothing that day. And then they keep going through this cycle of overeating, undereating, overeating, undereating. So one of the first things we have them look at is not only calorie intake, but also sodium intake. So they need to normalize their sodium per day, and that helps fight off kind of unwanted pudginess from day to day. So you want to calculate out what your sodium is. You'll find that there's generally an average over, if you calculate 3 to 5 days, you'll have an average. If you see extreme swings, pick somewhere in the middle and then start narrowing down the swings. Okay, try to get to a kind of normalized amount that you're having pretty consistently, from day to day. What you'll see is that alone might make you feel better. But if you normalize it and you figure out, like, hey, you know what, on average, I eat between 2,000 and 2,400 milligrams of sodium a day. But I still have all those negative effects, like where I'm drinking a lot, peeing a lot. I kind of like sweating horribly bad. I have no energy. So I probably need to increase my sodium. So once you have a normalized amount, you then want to increase it by 300 to 500 milligrams every couple days. So take 3 to 5 days, and you can even take up to a week, and just bump your number up over that course of those, like, say, 5 to 7 days, by 300 to 500. See if you feel better. Okay, if you feel a little better after a week, take another week and bump it up a little bit more. You'll eventually find where when you bump it up more, you don't get any benefit. Okay, you don't feel any better. So that means you need to stop there. Now, if you're worried about blood pressure, simply track your blood pressure every day. So just track your blood pressure as you're trying to watch your sodium and increase your sodium. Stuff doesn't take that long to do. Okay, checking your blood pressure can be done super fast. And then just paying attention to your sodium intake, like adding foods into like MyFitnessPal, that might take you 15 minutes per day at most to do that. Okay, so if you're not willing to take 15 minutes a day to take care of this issue, then I can't believe you're listening to a 30-minute podcast about it. If you're listening to a 30-minute podcast trying to figure out how to better hydrate yourself, but you won't put 15 minutes a day into it, you're lazy. Yep, no one likes being told that. But I've had people chime in, or they'll listen to this stuff and they're like, oh man, I don't want to do all that work. It's 15 minutes a day, you lazy ass. Like, what the hell? so you can handle it. You can do it. Okay. So, but things aren't going to get any better if you listen to all this information and then you don't do anything with it. So you have to do something with it. So yes, it might be annoying to have to track your sodium for a couple days. It might be annoying to make nutrition changes to get your sodium up. Okay? Yeah, that's all annoying, but it's probably more annoying to feel like crap when you work out and not get all the results that you've wanted. So think of how long you've been working out for and not getting the best results for your effort. And you're going to continue to do that? You're going to continue to waste your time when it really could be fixed in 15 minutes a day? Holy cow, come on now. Okay? So, some of this stuff sounds like work. It is work, but it's not that hard. Okay? So, that's what we would do to kind of figure out our sodium and how to get it up, is find out your normal daily average, get it normalized. If you have big swings, try to cut those swings down, and then take every week or so and just bump up 300 to 500 milligrams until you don't feel a difference. Stop there. If you're worried about blood pressure, just check it along the way. Okay? So, what about electrolytes? Not that big of a concern. Okay? I know they get touted as being very important, and they're in like everything nowadays, but if you're having adequate calories, adequate protein, adequate carbs, and at the right times, and you're having adequate sodium, you're not going to be at really that negative of a risk of electrolyte imbalance or kind of insufficient electrolytes, because you're going to get all that stuff through your food. So really the major concern with insufficient electrolytes is people who do ultra marathon crazy stuff. So I've helped somebody who used to run 100-mile races. That's insane. I can't believe that person. Something's wrong with them. But those people will have issues. People who do Ironmans, stuff like that. So they're going to have electrolyte concerns. Hopefully not overly during their training if they're eating right and taking care of themselves. But definitely on the day of the competition, they're going to worry about that kind of stuff. So let's skip that. But in general, everyday training, regular people not doing crazy stuff, electrolytes are not that big of a concern. Okay? So if you're getting enough calories, enough carbs, and enough sodium, you're going to be fine. Cool? Okay. So the last thing we're going to cover is should you drink Gatorade or water when you work out? I get that question all the time. Depends on what your needs are, okay? So if you were low in your food intake and you kind of didn't do good with your meal timing before the workout, having some kind of drink with carbs in it, like sugars in it, is going to make you feel better. So that's a good idea. Gatorade would be good. If you don't like Gatorade, drink Powerade, get powder, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just drink something with sugar, okay? Now, if you did good with your food intake, then water's probably fine. So you'll be okay. So how you would know is if you kind of died off on energy later in the workout, next day, go ahead and try to do a little bit of a sugary drink, and if you feel better, then that's the thing you should do. Okay? Pretty easy. Just trial and error. Okay? So try these steps, see if